that was a good roundup of you know, what you're thinking about next. And we've been doing a little bit of preparation, what we thought might be interesting for you. But something came up to me there we hadn't rehearsed before, so hopefully I won't drop you in it on this one. A lot of the next phase is about feedback, monitoring. So, and we haven't really talked about IoT. And you've got a great example because you've got a very distributed system out there. How are you thinking about these sort of feedback mechanisms? Is it from people doing their jobs and people ringing in, or are you going to be actively monitoring?
Yeah, we already do some active monitoring of our system. So we do have a building connectivity program inside L&Q. It's run by a separate team, but we do have one. And we're mindful of that program and how it works, but we're looking sort of almost further ahead. So ideally, we need to be in a position where you're able to start to get much more self-service. And at the moment, like, it's very hard if a resident phones up to actually, you know, quickly get to the root of that problem and to be able to resolve it. And we want to be able to get there much easier. So these are things like introducing tagging systems, barcoding tagging. So if something's broken, rather than asking a resident to try to describe what it is, it's like scan something. And this comes, our program is interlinked with lots of other bigger programs in L&Q. Like we have an online program, so we are looking at how we have residents interacting with us. So when you're introducing any of these change programs, like a BIM program, or an information management program, you can't do it in silo. And I think that's often where sometimes they fail. You really need to be embedded with all of the other programs that are happening inside your business, and they have to work collaboratively together. And I think that is a big challenge, because sometimes people go, this is my department and I'm very precious of it, and I don't, you know, want to like give it up, and it's mine. While sometimes your team might be the best to deliver it. Yeah. So that's our approach. Is we're transforming our whole business, and the information management is one part of
one enabler. Yeah. But Peter, I mean, you've also got an interesting collection of end users, students, that are out there. How is your information management plan going round to not just the caretakers, but actually your students?
I suppose we had two, that came in two ways. One, our building was treated as what we called a living lab. Yeah. So we give them access to information around the energy use of the building. That's all up on the screens as they come in. And we also sized the likes of the boiler houses that they were large enough that the students could go in and see them. And then all of the information that we have in the building. One of our contractual deliverables is that the BIM use under the BIM protocol is educational and curriculum. So we're able to use the information we do in our courses. And we have a digital construction high-level apprenticeship, and they would use the likes of particularly the Banbridge and the Armagh building as an example in a lot of what they're doing. But that's a journey though as well for the curriculum. Yeah. So as I say, we are still on our journey, but those are some of the issues we've done to try and get the students involved, because there's one of our main missions with the college is that it's the students first. Yeah. So it is an important aspect of what we do.
Yeah. So, Ryan, you mentioned earlier on in your discussions, you've just released version 2 of your framework. So what's next on your agenda then? Now you've released it. Where are you heading with your emphasis?
It's just picking up on the living lab point. It's a nice term. With the version 2 of the information management plan, it's obviously going more granular to get that consistency across the supply chain at the handover point. And we're also looking at how we can almost support clients through dashboarding or whatever, or SharePoint, which we'll probably touch on in another conversation, to utilize that information in the operational phase. But during COVID, every school in Scotland, or every classroom in Scotland had to have a CO2 sensor installed to start to allow, once the schools all started to blend back in, there was a mechanism for teachers to be able to control the environment. So there's pilot work going on with additional sensors to use that data in different ways, and to optimize also space utilization And that's, so there is sort of frontier work happening within the estates, existing estates, to get that data to inform the new wave of schools that are also coming in, but also to allow those users to optimize their space going forward. And I think where the information management plan gets to us in terms of a static handover, you'd be able to then link in that live dynamic data to give, that future flexibility of the buildings. So that's the sort of direction we're moving in.
Okay. And how long do you think the next phase for you is going to take before we get to these futures?
It's a good question. I mean, our approach is bringing our stakeholders along with us. I mean, we, as SFT, we are just facilitating the process or the development of the resource. I mean, you could call as digital twins or whatever an aspiration everyone's trying to get to. We could spend our lifetime trying to define that, I guess. We're just trying to get the practical, trying to get nuggets of value from using that static and dynamic data, and probably focusing on those, and then using the supply chain to either deliver that or to utilize that. So it'll be driven by, one, the value and the outcomes of that, and the ability of the stakeholders to be able to deliver and access that or use that information to the greater good.
Yeah. I guess one of the interesting things is the supply chain and your own internal people mature enough to move on to the next step, because you can't move ahead of the maturity curve. And one of the things that we haven't really discussed is that maturity. What are our indicators that we should move ahead? And we were just in the break, we're having a little bit of a chat saying that actually the technology is moving at a faster pace than we are. We can do a lot more with technology we haven't currently got, we haven't bought. We're behind the curve. I think it was you were saying that Johnny, that we could do a lot more. So what are the triggers for bringing that in and moving forwards? Budget is obviously an issue. Anybody got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, as Menno knows, we both worked for a technology company and did so, in my case, for 11 years, Autodesk, for my sins. And one of the key things that we talked about, and there's a book by Jeffrey A. Moore called Crossing the Chasm, and one of the key things he mentions is that as a particular technology gets adopted, there's a tipping point where it won't move to what we call the early majority until such time as we can demonstrate that it's scalable and it's reliable and that you've got sufficient service to support it. So if you're one of the early adopters, you're probably going to take a risk, but further down, the pragmatists don't. Now, the point that I'm making with this is that very often being able to identify an incremental step change that actually delivers value to a large number of people is actually better than trying to do a very big change that only affects a small number of people. So it's really about our focus on small things that actually make a big difference, rather than looking for a big step change, which probably is only going to affect a small number.
So evolution rather than revolution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for me, I like to keep it simple. I think sometimes it's by choosing the right technology, and sometimes the right technology is the simple stuff, and sometimes it's the sort of simple stuff. I don't mean low tech, but the simple stuff is the stuff that really makes big difference. So I think someone else was talking about like 360 photography, and really, really big one for us. I think 360 photography is making a bigger change than 3D models were. And I know that sounds strange, but because it's just such a simple thing. But the reality is it's holding people to account. Like a 3D model never could. A laser scan doesn't really do it. Like things like 360 photography linked in with your quality inspection test plan program, your handover of information, all of these things can really, really change things. So it's sometimes it's about getting the right technology, and I agree that once these things suddenly become embedded, then they'll be everywhere. And I would say 360 photography and some other simple technology like that at the moment is really taking off in the industry. I think it's going to have a massive difference.
Yeah, I was pick up now. I think there's most of this boils down to education. again, if you look at when you actually join a company, how much training do you actually get when you join a company, how that company actually works, the systems in place. When was the last time anybody received training for Microsoft Word or Excel? How much inefficiencies are they actually doing in their day-to-day job, because they still use these basic tools. So it all comes down to education, and again, for smaller companies to actually invest, again, marginal gains, these small increments of actually getting efficient can have a massive change by the end of the project. So it's definitely all about education, but again, that comes at a cost. And what I've seen over the last couple of years is everybody's fixated at getting stuff for free. I think we need to take, again, be a bit honest and go, we have to pay for stuff to get ultimate benefits at the end. But it's just how much that costs us and what we can afford is basically the bigger picture here.
Based on Graham, I think I'm gonna go to the macro view, is collaboration in industry. Menno, you mentioned before, if some company is doing some implementation about any software, the collaboration between the industry will help us to increase, and like the aerospace or the auto industry. So we are far, far away. We need more collaboration between everybody to increase our perspective.
Okay. We are talking a lot about change management, getting more productivity out of our people. I'm working for NEOM, a big city that's being built in Saudi Arabia. I just read some numbers this morning that we expect to need 650,000 workers at the peak of our production. And there's just not that many workers out there, so we'll never be able to get that many people into the project. I think even about logistic issues to get those people to their work. So we didn't talk about automating our processes, robotizing our processes. I think we need to move fast in trying to use more robotics, use more automation processes in design, but also in construction. So I would like to see what is possible in our industry to replace manual work by robotics and automation. So I would like to have a discussion about that.
So for you, that's an immediate next action, because you're going to hit a critical problem.
Yeah.
You've got to solve it. So
Absolutely.
That's often the driver of that one. How pervasive, though, is robotics in our industry? I've seen a lot about it, but I haven't heard that it's, deploy the robot. It's just a natural stage. What is everybody doing on the robotics side? Anything? Nothing?
Maybe not so much on the robotics, but certainly I think there's a lot of opportunity on the design side in terms of moving from normal modelling processes to parametric modelling processes, and automating on that side. And I think some designers are starting to see those. So I think there's efficiencies will start to happen at that stage 2, stage 3 and 4 side of things in the design process.
And that's already happened in Industry 4.0, for instance. Model-based design and MBSE, model-based systems engineering, has actually been driven and is there. But I haven't seen it completely adopted, widespread yet in our industry. And I would agree. If you're maybe in the hospitals project, there's a lot of modularity and reuse that could be applied. There's a lot of those buildings, schools. There's a lot of those buildings, residents. I guess some of the contractors are doing model-based approaches already in residential buildings. In housing.
So, just to summarize, question from me.
Yeah, hold it closer.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, just to summarize, the question from me for the panel. What are your varying visions and strategies amongst your organizations to address the future aspirations? So we have been talking about different approaches. We've been talking about what you're doing in terms of automating certain workflows, parts of your methodology, but is there an overall strategy that's leading this?
I would say, Mega, we see information as being record, so that's the make of the boiler. We see it being historical, that's the date it was last maintained or inspected, and then we see it as being live, as in the current temperature of the boiler. So that's how we see the information. We currently have access to that information, but it's siloed. One's in our BMS, one's in our Access 2000, and one's a CCTV. So for us, the vision is to connect better and to link up better. And I think that's where we're looking towards the likes of a digital twin. So we have it there, but it's not cohesive.
Yeah. Actually, I think that brings us on to maybe the elephant in the room that we haven't spoken about, which is CDEs. So we had a lot of discussion ourselves about CDEs and what the next stage and what can you buy a CDE. So who wants to start us off on CDEs? Because it's a key to making information available for collaboration is having a CDE. So who wants to start on that?
I'll start with that. Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion, especially in the last couple of months on Twitter, exactly what is a CDE. And in most instances, with all the CDE platforms we have just now, they're not really common data environments. They're mostly electronic document management systems. It's basically just somewhere you actually just dump a file. It doesn't actually embed into the data unless you're using there's Norma and various other formats you can use, or SharePoint that can actually pull that information. So it's actually getting to the point where the BSI training we do, we show the whole the CDE as an enterprise system where it validates as you actually upload, or you can go one step further and look at Industry 5.0 as you actually model, or what we can call Googleized construction. Well, there's a good one. Googleized construction industry. As you actually model, actually informs you what the next step is based on past experience and knowledge. That's looking at data analytics, and we actually feed that in the process. So the CDE can be tied to that. So you can imagine that all the various company ecosystems are all linked together. So as you model, it starts to inform various other people on what their actions are, and your data is also validated at the exact same time. And that, when you actually start to think about that as an idea, which was my original thesis idea from my master's, but I stupidly went somewhere else, you can then expand that to a whole bunch of other things. So looking at Google, and then as you model, it pulls in materials, it pulls in data, and you can actually expand and expand that and go forward as well. So
but is the CDE a bit like, back in the 90s? We had the knowledge management system.
Yeah.
What happened to those?
Well, that's it. It can all link together because, again, the knowledge management system is based on certain government practices what are standards have been placed since the 60s and 70s in quality management. Again, there's nothing new here, but it's just basically trying to get how do you instill that knowledge in people, or how do you educate them? People don't have time to read stuff. They're busy trying to do their day job. So it's almost like if we had a platform, it could actually, as you're doing stuff, it would tell you what the next step is. Well, I'm not saying you're an idiot, you don't know it, but it's just pointing in the right direction. That may actually inform you better and quicker and actually get a much more efficient process.
David?
Yes, I'd add to that.
Actually, before David answers, if any of you want to ask a question, you're stimulated by this, raise your hands and Megan will come around with a microphone. So you can interrupt us.
So go on one step further than that, which is that although you want to store information, what you also want to do is to record what I describe as transactions. Because if somebody sends you a request for information, RFI, or if there's a transmittal, if you can't record those transactions and maintain an audit trail on those transactions, then you end up in a situation where contractually you're going to be basically encountering risk that you can't manage. So a CD needs to go beyond storing bits of information to also recording transactions between the different parties. Serious note, before we go into that, one of the serious note is that one of the things, and I mentioned this in the magazine for this event, which was because of the lack of any record of transactions for Grenfell Tower, that was the reason why they are still trying to unravel to this day who did what and were they responsible for it. So it's very critical.
You're talking about PLM systems now, right?
Well,
but for the built environment. Yeah.
Yes, and the transactional piece is critical. I think it's very often we just see it as, storing models and drawings and so on. But if we can't keep an audit trail on transactions between the different parties who are involved, then it's not really achieving its purpose. Yeah.
Again, I got to take first of all, so CD might be different for different people in different parts of the industry. If you're in the design phase, it's going to be different. But from our end, it's taking a step back again and looking at what are we trying to do and looking at trying to control the information. So we take the approach of trying to split the data from documents, but then link them back because they're happening. So if you'll have a fire risk assessment, you'll go out, you'll do one of them. At the end of that, you will have produced some form of a PDF probably, but also there is a lot of actions that come out of that. And in large clients, it's really, really complicated. We have so many different systems. So, you have your repair systems, you'll have, finance systems, all these other systems. So we've sort of tried to take the approach of master data management and master document management. So we're trying to get our systems to be simple so that we can plug, for instance, our repairs platform in, and it can both use the data that's required in there, plus also use the documents. It's about going in, doing those transactions, having those trigger events, and trying to manage it that way. So we're trying to move away from your off-the-shelf, document, your AConnects and those type of common data environments. And it's not to say that they don't have their place; they do at certain areas, but and what we're trying to do is build the tools on top of our sort of master data and our master documents. So if I need to do markup, just have a tool that's really good at drawing markups. If I and just carry on like that, instead of trying to build these into an off-the-shelf system that then are, I know they say they all have APIs, but in essence they are closed systems, and you're sort of locked into them for so many number of years. So
CDE by aggregation, really, of different information sources, yeah. Mega, do you want to?
It's more an observation than a question, but you mentioned AConnects there. We work for the health service, and we've just recently introduced AConnects as our CDE, but it's more our EDMS as we're starting to develop. And in Ireland, the health service is at a very, very early stage of digital adoption. And we're introducing it as part of a wider estates information system. So we're integrating some of the AConnects mail information with an integrated workplace management system as well. So through APIs, really challenging to try and get the right information across from one system to the other. And I suppose we're still at an early stage of adoption, but one thing I will observe is that the industry and probably our own people still try and find the easiest way to do things, not necessarily the right way of doing things. And some of our CDEs need to be configured to only allow us to do things the right way rather than the easy way. I don't know if that's a comment worth having.
Well, so first of all, like obviously at HSC, you have huge spending power and use that. So the way we do it is we're trying to have our documents on a really simple system. We have some, so we define our requirements. So then anytime we're buying a tool, it's like you're responsible for all of that API configuration. So if we are buying a specialist tool, it's like this is how we manage our documents, this is how we manage our data. It's up to you when you're tendering, so just like us, you'll do loads of frameworks and like long-term tendering, put into those documents and then put it back onto the vendor's responsibility. And if they want that work, they will do all of that. They should be doing it for you, rather than you buying a tool and then your developers having to do configuration into their system, and they'll be blaming your developers, and all that back and forth doesn't work. It needs to happen right at that contractual stage, because if it doesn't happen when you're buying the systems, you're just in for like years of pain, in my opinion. So,
okay.
Yes,
Stephen. Any online questions before? I was trying to look then, but I can't look at the online questions. Anything?
Should we?
Let me continue with Johnny. Collaboration between the platforms. There is no CDE platform that is the best one. We need to have collaboration between the different ones to share the information, because at the end, a CDE is one platform, is one area where we store the information, or could be different platforms where all of them are connected. There is collaboration between all of them to share the information. That is my question in terms of CDE.
Okay. So we will take the question in the room, and then yes, Steve.
One online one.
Yeah.
And then I want to come back to a final subject.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Benjamin's my name. I'm from Katenda.
Could you hold it closer to your mouth?
Benjamin's my name, and I'm from Katenda. We a Norwegian company that also have a open BIM CDE called BIM Sync. And the discussion that I'm hearing is, wouldn't it be beneficial that all different types of CDEs are working based on the same standard, and then in that way, it doesn't matter really what CDE you pick, there's the possibility of connecting to other systems if everything if all are working based on open standards?
Interoperability.
So the simple answer, yes. You as an industry go off and do it and come back to us. It's your problem to solve, not ours. We're clients.
Yeah. Okay, do we want an online question?
Thanks for that straight answer, Johnny, as always.
Is the heretic in the room?
Okay, so I am trying to decipher this one, but then I think they mean, can designers apply improved performance strategies for future projects by accessing prior project data connected to digital BIM models? So meaning reference information from existing
Learning from what we've done right and what we've done wrong.
Yeah.
Anyone want to take that one?
That was effectively what I was talking about. You know, it's like if you're Googleizing the construction industry, if you can actually model and then based on past performance and knowledge and experience, it would inform you. You remember 3 projects ago, you messed this up. Well, remember, you don't do it again. That sort of thing. You know, a bit flippant there, but that's the sort of thing we're looking at.
And I suppose what we're saying is that's the benefit of digital twins, if you like, and having the vision and strategy to create those for your organizations.
Yeah, it's almost like if you could actually take your company, if your company's been going for 50 years, could you actually download all the knowledge your company's amassed over 50 years and then actually start to use that and actually put it to them, not just like, it's almost like business benefits, financial benefits, HR training. There's a whole bunch of stuff you could actually take that. How you analyze that, I wouldn't care to imagine how you would do that, but that must be a good task for somebody to start looking at.
We will not talk too much into what you both
You stood too close to the speaker.
Well, Menno and Steve are going to talk about a bit of that, aren't they? But can we... So sorry. Ryan had his hand up. Could we...
No, I was just going to make the point about, Peter, your work and your role. You were saying earlier how do you describe your role, but you've got a unique position in that what you're learning, you're disseminating through curriculum, and it's not about digital twins telling us this failed here, so you should do this differently. It's about the next generation that's coming up and giving them the practicalities of how things should be done and embedding that within their design process. And I think what you do is, if we could scale that, as a profession, as an industry, through our work, be able to disseminate back into the curriculum, that would make a massive difference.
Okay, David.
Yeah. One of the key aspects of this is to realize that not everything that we monitor is completely objective. Sentiment is not completely objective. And a lot of the data that's collected on that tends to be unstructured. So in the end, you use AI techniques to be able to judge that sentiment and so on. But to be able to feed that back into the future design is critical, because ultimately you stand or fall in terms of the occupants' behaviors. So things like post-occupancy evaluations are absolutely critical, and we don't do enough of it in what we do.
And on that subject, sort of the last point I wanted to pose was, and we've all heard of bad building syndrome. It is possible to build a really bad building people do not like being in. And if we don't capture that and build it into the models, then we can go on creating bad buildings. Well-being has got a lot more focus on these days, normally from a depression type state. But, we can influence how well people spend that 8 hours of their day in the office, or 9 or 10 hours in the office, or whatever building they do. So I think it's a really important point, the people feedback.
Okay, we have...
Sorry, I was just saying it's one of the pillars that we focus on is well-being and capturing that from the occupants. And very often on paper, you look at the flow rates, you look at the natural light levels, and you'll say, on paper, this space should work, and yet people hate that room. What is it that we're missing? And I think to fill the gaps requires that kind of capture of post-occupancy evaluations and being able to feed that back into the future design process.
Have the reference data. Okay, we have final 2 questions, and I think, Steve?
We've got time for 1 question. We're already over.
No, 2, please, because they both have been waiting.
The question for Johnny. Angus O'Keefe from Ronan O'Donovan Consulting Engineers. You mentioned earlier that the hardest part of what you're trying to do is extracting the knowledge and documenting the knowledge of the end user's needs for the information. And ultimately that would inform rules for the information, so information requirements. Have you made a technology choice for how to structure that knowledge, how to define those rules so that it can inform validation of the data at a later stage?
So we're looking at all those requirements need to go into a technology solution to structure it, and so you get it once you've defined it, that you get it the same way every time, because then you can reuse it. So yeah, so we are looking at. I'm not here to promote or to talk about any different sort of types, individual sort of technology stuff, but yeah, more than happy to speak to people after that, like what companies we work with or whatever. So yeah, but once you've defined your information, the technology is the one that then helps you make sure you're constantly getting that information the same way. Because otherwise, if you just leave it, for instance, if you ask somebody for it in an email, you're never going to get it, are you? So.
Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Andy Krebs from Sweco. I'm interested in the conversation that started going around pulling the data together and being able to reuse it. I think it was the online question. The Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers, through the Society of Digital Engineering, is trying to do that, but we're really struggling to get the in-use data from buildings. And we all know building standards and all the guides and stuff that we use come from lab data from the 1980s and 1970s, and to be quite frank, is rubbish. Sustainability as a topic, sustainability engineers are building services engineers who use existing evidence and new evidence, but they do the same job. How do we get the clients to give the entire engineering and design of buildings sort of industry their private information? It is private information. We're dealing with homes, we're dealing with people's day-to-day lives, we're dealing with large, often very secret assets. But that information is the only way that we're going to be able to give you guys what you want, because there's a thing called the Building Happiness Index, which has been developed at the moment as an attempt to remember that buildings aren't financial assets, they're human assets. So how can we make you guys feel safe to give us all your data? And I know various buildings that you guys all manage, and I know why you don't necessarily want it to be in the public domain, but what would allow that to happen in your mind?
And I think I'd like Ryan to start on that answer. Yeah, you want to give a perspective on that one, on because you've got, you're working in
Schools.
Public authorities where government must be interested in this. So I would have thought that government should be driving this. The ability to have your data shared for the benefit of society, I think, is what you're really looking at. Yeah. Any thoughts?
I mean, I agree, but I also agree that not all data, define what transparency is, and you can't open up everything, obviously, and make it available to everybody. So it has to be selective. I think personal thought at the moment is just around like clients' responsibility and ownership of both the assets and the data that's associated with that. At the moment, you could link it back to the CDE discussion we had earlier. Do clients actually want to own all the information through the whole life cycle? Are they even capable of doing that? As I say, that's a separate conversation, but certainly within Scotland, public sector bodies, local authorities are becoming more and more responsible and accountable for the well-being and the performance of the building, and to achieve carbon or net zero or energy gap performance targets. And I do feel that there will be potentially penalties against that if they didn't hit a certain mark or buildings weren't healthy. And then, who knows, there may be grades or labels associated with that. You just mentioned the happiness index, potentially. So I do feel that there should be some transparency. If a building's hitting a certain criteria and hitting a certain mark, that data or that information about that should be available for the greater good. How that's done, I don't know. We need to work it out.
Yeah, okay. And I think at that point there, we have to move on to the next session. So